The First World War, which 100 years ago today was being fiercely fought in Europe and Western Asia, was like no other war before it. As this film shows, and it was probably staged, the war was industrial, brutal and shocking. A number of factors had combined to create the First Industrial War. High explosives with ordnance that could deliver huge bombs over large distances, machine guns, planes. These all made the older form of open warfare redundant. Very rapidly, the war on all fronts became bogged down in a stalemate, the antagonists facing each other, dug into trenches, occasionally attempting to storm the enemy's position to make the breakthrough to end the war. The film here was a recreation of the Somme, one of the most iconic battles of the war. It gives some idea of the horror that was faced by the troops, but the day-to-day reality of life in trenches was about the constant threat of being blown up or shot. For even if they were not involved in the full frontal, over-the-top assaults that characterised the set-piece battles up until 1917, there were always the bombardments, the machine gun fire, the snipers, the mines, the prospect of taking part in minor assaults on enemy lines, or to repair the barbed wire, which was the first line of defence. Death could come from above or below, and it was an ever-present threat. No wonder then the troops started breaking down. Here, let's roll back to Charcot. We've already talked about his women hysterics, but one of the real breakthroughs he made was to realise that hysteria was not solely a female condition. Men started coming into his clinic who had suffered some form of trauma, maybe a road or industrial accident, and their injuries were in no way able to explain why they couldn't walk, talk, or possess the strange tics and jerks that were observable in the women hysterics. This film from Netley, the huge hospital that served the Royal Army Medical Corps, gives a very clear indication of what the new condition looked like. The total inability to walk, because although the joints were organically sound, the mind was preventing their operation. Strange, ambling gaits. The man who is perfectly fit but can't control his limbs properly. The man who can remember nothing, who can't hear words, can't understand a single thing except the word bomb, upon which he dives under the bed. There was then a model into which this new widespread condition of warfare could be configured. But initially, when the symptoms first started appearing, the doctors didn't really know what to make of it. Although very rapidly, Myers gave the condition a name: shell shock. Initially, there was a medical belief that what was being witnessed was actually damage to the nervous system, a result of the percussive effects of the detonation of the new high explosives. Others, however, like the notorious Louis Yelland, who along with many in medicine on all sides of the conflict, believed that it was a form of hysteria in the Charcot mould, in other words, trauma combined with degeneration. And still others, initially a minority, but increasingly vocal towards the end and immediately after the war, put it down to trauma. For men like W.H.R. Rivers, who was influenced by the psychological work of Freud, without the sex, and the brilliant French psychologist Pierre Janet, trauma was the alpha and omega of the etiology of shell shock. However battle-hardened and brave an individual might be, every man had his breaking point. It might be being buried alive in an explosion or being covered in the body parts of your mate. You could have come through months or years of the conflict unscathed, but at some point you could take no more. Nevertheless, there was a stigma that remained attached to those who had broken mentally in ways that it did not to the physically wounded. Things weren't helped by the equivocal report of the War Office Committee of Inquiry into Shell Shock of 1922, which took a very sort of uneven stance, on the one hand saying that the loss of nerve was no excuse for malingering or desertion, but that severe cases should receive treatment. All of this was to change in the next world conflict, especially within the US Army, which led the way in taking a psychodynamic approach to battle fatigue, as it became known. As we will see, this had dramatic repercussions for the profession of psychiatry and its practice in the USA. John Huston, the remarkable Oscar-winning film director, worked for the US Army during the Second World War making propaganda movies. Let There Be Light was one of the last of these. For some reason it was never released. Perhaps the Army felt that with further wars looming, with the prime candidate as an opponent, Soviet Russia, an expose of the psychological collateral damage of war would be inappropriate or downright dangerous. All the same, as an historical testimony of treatment in time and place, it is extraordinary, for it represents two things. The introduction that follows indicates that there was a fear that stigma would be attached to battle fatigue, and that the film will act as a corrective to this very real and damaging condition. Pity is being demanded for those suffering mind, as much pity as that given to those who had suffered in body. Pay attention, though, to the language. Huston is at pains to make the psychiatric disorders real by equating them in a way that Esquirol would have recognised only too well as lesions in the mind.
The guns are quiet now, the papers of peace have been signed, and the oceans of the earth are filled with ships coming home. In faraway places, men dreamed of this moment, but for some men, the moment is very different from the dream. Here is human salvage, the final result of all that metal and fire can do to violate mortal flesh. Some wear the badges of their pain, the crutches, the bandages, the splints. Others show no outward signs, yet they too are wounded. This hospital is one of the many for the care and treatment of the psychoneurotic soldier.
But more importantly, this film represents the moment when US psychiatry was captured by Freudianism.
This man suffering from a conversion hysteria requires immediate treatment. Organically sound, his paralysis is as real as if it were caused by a spinal lesion, but it is purely psychological.
Well, just sit him up about the middle of the bed there.
I feel pretty good, huh?
That's fine. Now sit yourself over there. Well, now, can you move over just a little so I can talk to you?
Yes, sir.
Now, what is the trouble? You think it'll be what's that?
That's nerves. Yes, it make me flinch like that.
I see. How long has that been going on?
Since Friday.
Friday
night.
Come on suddenly or gradually?
Suddenly, sir.
How?
Well, I start in the afternoon with crying spells.
Mm-hmm.
And felt something funny in my shoulders here. Back bothered me. I started crying. I lost control of my legs and my arms.
Was there any reason for crying spells?
I don't know, sir.
Anything happen at home to bother you?
Well, my mother's been ill.
She has been ill.
That's right.
Does that worry you a lot?
Quite a bit.
Well, now, has this got anything to do with your mother's illness? Any reason why you should have that kind of reaction?
No, sir, not that I know of. Unless my mother's illness might have brought this on. I tried to hold in about her hurts, but...
I see. You've just been holding these things in.
That's right, sir.
No way you can control this at all?
No, sir.
Well, now we're going to have to help you do that, of course. Let's take off this jacket here. Just slip that off. All right, now lie down on the bed.
My shoes.
Right, now we'll leave the shoes on so you can walk in them. I think we're going to get you walking. Let's come over here. That's the boy. That's fine. That's good. Now you lie steady. Lie steady. That's the boy. This is all going to go away as I give you this medicine. No bother at all.
The method employed here is effective in certain types of acute cases. An intravenous injection of sodium amytal induces a state similar to hypnosis.
What a torpedo that is. You mind if I look this way?
You look that way. There's nothing for you to watch here, but you're going to talk to me as we go along.
Yes, sir.
That's all. Now, you're not going to feel much of anything else. You're going to feel a little bit woozy.
The use of this drug serves a twofold purpose. Like hypnosis, it is a shortcut to the unconscious mind. As a surgeon probes for a bullet, the psychiatrist explores the submerged regions of the mind, attempting to locate and bring to the surface the emotional conflict which is the cause of the patient's distress. The second purpose of this drug is to remove, through suggestion, those symptoms which impede the patient's recovery.
Now, tell me a little bit about what you're thinking of.
Nothing
The thoughts are coming to your mind now.
Nothing in particular.
Well, now let's go back. Let's go back to Friday.
Friday.
Yeah, think about that.
Friday. My mother argues with me.
Your mother argues with you.
Yeah.
What does she argue about?
Well, every little thing. If you sit down in a long chair or something like that. Doesn't like the stuff you get in the store. Then she calms down.
Well, see, have you always tried to please her?
Yes.
Always tried to please her.
I used to clean the house for her when I was small.
Well, now, why do you think she argues like that? Think
Well,
because
she
she's
must-
sick?
Well, she doesn't try to control her temper.
I see. How about your father?
He's a swell guy.
He's a swell fellow, isn't he?
Gets kind of hot-tempered. Since my mother's been sick, it's been costing a lot of money. And he's lost a lot of weight about worrying.
I see.
My mother argues with him. She wants to know where the money is. But I don't care about that as long as everything turns out all right.
Well, now, this jumping, what does that make you think of? Think about it a minute.
I can't help it. It just jumps.
How about the legs? Do you know anybody who had any trouble with their legs like that?
No, sir.
What does it make you think of? Go on.
Except several years ago, there was one fella. He had something wrong with his right leg. Waterman didn't need, but he's walking today. That hasn't bothered me.
Was that anything like your leg?
I don't know. He couldn't walk at all.
He couldn't walk at all?
No.
What do you think of when you can't walk like that?
I wish I could walk.
Well, what do you think of? What comes to your mind when you find that you can't walk?
So maybe I think my mother and father should be okay. Sometimes I wonder, hope the war ends soon. Things like that. Nothing in particular.
Well, now the shakes are gone now, haven't they?
Yeah.
How about your legs? They're good and strong.
I feel all right.
Move them. Let's raise them.
Oh, I was able to raise them before, but I can't walk.
Well, how about them now?
They feel all right.
They feel good now, as if you can walk in them, don't they?
Toes feel numb.
Toes feel numb, but that's going away, isn't it?
Yeah. Gee.
So, raising them fine, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now you're going to be able to walk, aren't you?
I don't know.
Well, you're going to, aren't you?
Yes, sir.
All right.
I'm going to walk. I love walking.
You love walking.
I did.
Always been very fond of walking. Now you found yourself unable to walk. Now you're going to get right up and walk. Right now. All right, now let's sit up. Sit up on the side of the bed. Here you are. That's fine. All right, now stand up. Now look at that. Is that good? All right, now walk out here. Walk over to the nurse all by yourself. That's the boy. Walk over to the nurse. You're just a little woozy. That's the medicine. Now come back to me. Come back to me. Open your eyes. That's the boy. Isn't that fine? Isn't that wonderful?
Sure.
All right, now again, once more.
Yeah, but how long will it be?
Oh, it's going to stay that way. It's going to stay because that's taking care of your worry now.
It has been suggested that the very success of the kind of treatments that you've just seen allowed all psychiatry to fall under the thrall of psychodynamic theory. In other words, the film visually documents the moment when psychoanalytic techniques and Freudian theory achieved dominance in US psychiatry, and to a lesser extent the UK and Australia. Accounts of post-war psychiatry in the US indicate that Freudianism became the be-all and end-all of psychiatric etiology. To be sure, this continued a tradition that had started before the war, when psychiatrists had extended the Freudian model from the neuroses to the psychoses. We will witness this in a defense that some raise for using techniques like lobotomy. But the success of treatments of war neuroses, like the one you've just witnessed, appeared to give an incredibly strong impetus to Freudianism. Not only that, it helped get the psychiatrists out of the asylum and into the office. The post-war period was to see a proliferation of ideas about what caused mental illness. The older genetic model still held sway with some people, despite the poor reputation of eugenics post the Nazis. But added to this were a whole load of things, including the schizophrenic mother, the notion that the failure of a mother to use the right effective strategies with her child were a fundamental cause of schizophrenia. This was just the tip of the iceberg. The biological rejection of psychiatric etiology was powerful. It incorporated not just Freudianism, but existential psychiatry that perceived the major cause of mental illness as being the result of the individual failing to deal with the problems of being in the world. In other words, failing to adapt to the demands of society. This was expressed most strongly in the anti-psychiatric movement, where figures like R.D. Laing, Aaron Esterson and David Cooper would argue that madness was a sane response to the social and prohibitive controls of 20th century industrial society. Laing and Esterson would argue that schizophrenia was the result of family dynamics. Laing and Cooper would see madness as a sane revolt against the madness of capitalist violence epitomised by the conflict in Vietnam. Thomas Sachs would even go so far as to argue that there was no such thing as madness. It was iatrogenic, the product of a conspiracy between psychiatrists and society. We will be exploring anti-psychiatry in more detail in the next lecture, because from its theoretical mashup of Sartre, Freud, Heidegger and Jaspers, to name the major influences, from all of this emerged the therapeutic community. Indeed, throughout this lecture, there's been an over-rigid and artificial divide between theory and therapy that will be properly fixed up in the next lecture, when the two will be rejoined together.